Thanks for tuning in for one of our Sunday messages. At Red, we're continuing to lean into our vision of being a church of passionate and committed disciples who are devoted to Jesus' alternative for the world. If you're inspired or encouraged by the ministry of our church, we'd love to have you join us. You can find out more at redchurch.au.
My name's Mark. If you are new, and welcome. If this is your first time, great to have you here. Also welcome, if this is your first time in church as well, don't feel like you are a shag on a rock. Lots of people coming to church for the very first time, so welcome to you. Lots of people coming at the moment. This is obviously a vision series, as Daniel just pointed out. And what I wanted to talk about this week, in week 2, and you're able to follow on in your booklets, is the church as family. And I really wanted to talk about the way that community and relationships are essential to the church, this gathering of people. There are many gatherings across the world. We see all different kinds of social structures throughout human history, but there's something unique about the church as this very local, but also very translocal, international, throughout history, this gathering of people known as the church. To do this, I wanted to begin with the scriptures. From the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 24 to 25, and the writer of Hebrews says this: "And let us consider how we may spur on one another toward love and good deeds." How we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Already there's some of the realities of a healthy community being outlined here. This element that a healthy community is filled with love and good deeds, but also there is a communal spurring on. This is not just something that happens from the very top. This is actually that's part of the DNA, the fabric, the fiber of this human community. The writer goes on to say then, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. This then says there is this almost thermodynamic principle that community needs tending, that there is this reality that it will move towards degradation in community unless there is this decision, this tending, just as weeds grow up in the garden. And one reality is, if you have a garden, if you're a gardener, which I'm not, every time I say it, Trudy's the gardener, not me, just in case when I use gardening metaphors, you think that it's coming from experience. But I do know this, that when it rains and then it's sunny, like it does in Melbourne, it is just wonderful for weeds. So gardens need weeds to be pulled up. And in the same way, there's something when it comes to building community that there's just this reality that things will, without tending, begin to wind down. The writer goes on, but encouraging one another, and all the more that as you see the day approaching. Two things. One is that encouraging together is really key, but also this is centered on the day. What is the day? The day is the end of the age. When Jesus returns, the new Jerusalem comes from the heavens, heaven and earth are reunited. That what we do about community now is not just the utility of community. I just want to say this early on. The utility of community is everywhere at the moment. You have local governments, state governments around the world are realizing that there is a fundamental problem, as we'll dig into it, with community. Read an interesting article today that in the next sort of 100 years, people groups that we're used to, like you hear these, you watch a nature documentary, a history documentary when you're young, and you hear of these ancient races, the Carthaginians who have disappeared. We're going to see the disappearance of groups like Italians, Japanese, Koreans in 1 or 2 generations will not exist anymore because community is degrading to the point where it's not even self-replicating anymore. All across the world, from the highest level to local government, is trying to work out how do we build the utility of community. But what this verse is saying is there's something very different at the center of it. This has a much bigger vista that actually Jesus is returning to earth. So, to talk about community, I wanted to begin in a very cliche place where I'm sure many of you thought, oh, he's going to go here. Here we go. I want to talk about fiber optic cables on the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Oh, not again. Last month, or in December actually, a Cook Islands registered ship, an oil tanker known as the Eagle S, was intercepted by the Finnish Navy and in the Baltic Sea. Why was this? Why was a Cook Islands, I've been to the Cook Islands, it's tiny, like really small. Why was a Cook Islands registered oil tanker doing something naughty in the Baltic Sea? Well, what the Finns were saying was, you just broke the fiber optic cables that come into our country bringing the internet. The ship was like, no, we just let our anchor down. Whoops, sorry. But this is not an incidental moment. This has been happening a lot. So this vessel was suspected of intentionally damaging both power cables and fiber optic cables connecting Finland with Estonia and Germany, knocking out its internet capability as well as its power capability. Now, this is not just a one-off. This has happened 11 times in the last 15 months in the Baltic Sea. Different ships, different like country registrations, all are like, whoops, we did it again. We let our anchor down. This happens, hey. But interestingly too, this is not just happening in the Baltic Sea. In the Straits of Taiwan, we had 3 undersea cables damaged in the past 2 years, and I think there was another one recently. Again, we let our anchor down. I'm so sorry. Now, the world changed when the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline exploded, which connected bringing gas from Russia to Germany and changed the economic outlook for Germany. What does this all matter? Why am I beginning here? Well, actually, what's happening in the 21st century is the fiber optic cables, the power cables, the gas pipelines that connect our world and bring so much of the benefits and lifestyle that we just assume that you're going to have the internet, that there'll be gas to turn your oven on, that there'll be oil for petroleum to put in your car, that the actual networks are beginning to be attacked. So going down a little rabbit hole, as I was preparing this sermon, I began to think, hang on, Australia is pretty vulnerable because we're an island that's not really near many things. So hang on, if someone wanted to just let the anchor down, what would our sort of threat assessment be? So here you go, these are the things I do in my spare time. I began to research the threat assessment against Australia and what would happen. So what they're saying now is that a war would now begin in the world, a great power conflict would begin in the world, not with countries bombing each other initially, is that in the 21st century, if there's a great power conflict, another world war, the first thing that will be attacked is the networks. So how quickly would this happen to Australia? So I've looked it up. Here's official threat assessment. This is not classified. You can tell your friends. Within 5 minutes, there would be massive cyber attacks. Satellite jamming would begin. Within 30 minutes, the undersea cables would be cut to Australia, and we've only got a handful, Perth, up towards Singapore and places. So Australia's like probably, Australia and New Zealand, a couple of islands are probably the most vulnerable in the world to this. That within 30 minutes, basically the internet would be gone in Australia. Within 2 hours, this would then have a flow-on effect. Most of our sort of internet is connected to our power grids. So within 2 hours, power grids, our data centers, and our entire financial system would collapse. Woo! Within 24 hours, Australia is mostly offline, relying on limited energy networks, and the only people that have sort of communications would be some hardwired military installations. And so Australia is highly vulnerable due to its reliance on undersea cables, foreign satellites, centralized power grids, and in this full-scale war, a well-planned attack would knock out Australia and all the stuff that we see as normal within hours. Why am I giving this bleak assessment? To prove a key point. Enemies will attack the conductive sinews and tissues of a society to disable its effectiveness and attack its very lifeblood. The people of God are the living temple of the presence of God. Our relationships, our gathered nature, our Christ-centered forms of community that are created are the sinews, the containers which the Holy Spirit moves through. In the early church, we see the rapid growth of the early church as something which moves through a kind of connective tissue. The Greek word for this connective tissue was oikos, meaning household or extended family. Extended family and household don't really get to the essence of it, because really what it is, it's like an extended family, but it also included servants or people who worked from you, business associates. It's this sort of gathered group of people who were deeply knitted in a web of human relationships. And what would happen was, this was the primary social unit in the ancient world. And it was a natural setting then for the gospel, the good news of Jesus, to spread through these relational networks. We see this in Acts 16, verses 31 to 34. Paul and Silas are in a jail in Philippi, and they're saved by the Lord and brought out of the jail. And Paul and Silas tell the Philippian jailer, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you'll be saved, you and your household," oikos. Then they spoke of the word of the Lord to him and to all others in his oikos. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them, washed their wounds, then immediately him and his entire household, oikos, were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house, oikos, and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he'd come to believe in God, he and his whole household. The early church grew rapidly as believers shared faith within these households. Nicholas Christakis, who's a social scientist, I think he's at Yale, talks about the fact that how we're less rationally wired than we think, that we're more socially wired. So in other words, if there's a bunch of people around you who all of a sudden start exercising and going to the gym, and that number, I think it's 8, if 8 of your closest associates start doing that, it's almost inevitable that you're going to the gym. If you go to the gym and so do 8 of your friends and they stop going to the gym, it works in reverse. It's most likely you're going to stop going to the gym. So there's something about this subset of relationships, and the gospel spread through them. And it's interesting too that in many places in the world today, this is how we see the gospel spread. Thus, the enemy, in order to wound and weaken the people of God, will come after these sinews and connective tissues, relationships, community, and fellowship, to blunt the effectiveness of the people of God. Well, to pick this apart, let's go to the origins of the idea of community and relationship. As I said, this is very different to just the utility of social relationships. And to do this, we go back, and there's great arguments in sociology and politics of what they call it the original political community. In other words, what was the original grouping of people? We're going to go back beyond that and go back to God at the very beginning of time. You see, God exists in community. This is what the doctrine of the Trinity is. It's a oneness, but also a relationship between Father, Son, and Spirit. St. Augustine said this: so the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. And all together are one God. And each of them is full and perfect God, yet they were not 3 gods, but one God, together but existing in this holy community. This means that community, God-centered community, is actually the sort of microscopic building block of all social life. Here's a fantastic image which captures this far better than I think I could explain it. This is from actually an illustration of St. Augustine's book, The City of God, De Civitate Dei. And you'll notice at the center of all human community is this image of God the Father. You can see him there on your left. Jesus the Son. And what I love, it looks like they're eating a seagull. They're not. What this actually is the Holy Spirit represented as a dove, but almost as the conversation and speech between them. And so this beautiful imagery, a father, a son relationship, but then the Spirit as this connective dove, this tissue between them. This means that we seek out and build community because we're made in his image. Yes, there are other social reasons that humans have done this throughout history, but what the scriptures are telling us is the center of that is this idea of who God is. And humans are made for relationships. We understand our humanity through them. The story of Robinson Crusoe is really the story of, can you be a functioning human being if you're just on an island by yourself? And the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, exist in perfect relationship. And this divine communion is the foundation of both our identity and community. You see this in how Jesus prays. Let's look at John 17, 20 to 26 in the scriptures. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who believe in me through the message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you've sent me. I've given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you've sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me. Father, I want to give those you have given me to be with me where I am and see my glory, the glory you've given me because you've loved me before the creation of the world. Again, that building block at the very beginning of creation. Righteous Father, through the world, that the world does not know you, I know you, and they know that you have sent me, and I have made you known to them, and will continue to make you known, in order that the love that you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. This is the love of the Trinity flowing out of Jesus into the people of God and into each other. Okay, this is a high point of relationships. And when you do this, it brings any relationships that we have now up against that standard. So I'd love to talk about this idea of reviving relationships. If you look at where the gospel is moving rapidly through the world at the moment, what you'll find is a similarity with the ancient world, that world that Paul and Jesus and Peter were preaching in, that there is still oikos in many of those communities. Where the gospel is spreading around the world, you will still find oikos. So I was hearing a talk from a friend who ministers in a non-Western environment. You know, he talked about doing Alpha. He shared the story of doing Alpha, and what happened was, one guy was invited. He sort of started to encounter Jesus, and he goes into his oikos. His oikos was his family and some of his business networks. And so he basically says that people running Alpha, I'm bringing some people, and he rocks up and he brings 125 people. That's his oikos. And this is what happens, you know, in our Western culture often, you know, one way to work out whether your culture, and people have got elements of oikos in Australia, depends on your cultural background, but one way to sort of measure it is, how many people would you ask, if you're going to marry someone, how many people would you need to get permission from? Now, some of you go, well, one other person, maybe I'd tell my mum or something, or my best friend. Others might go, okay, well, Auntie so-and-so's got to know about this and this person. We're on the phone, we're ringing this person in another country. I asked this question in Scandinavia, and they're like, no one. So the actual size of different oikoses differs. But what's happening is in Australia, in the West, an increasingly developed world, oikoses are weakening and even disappearing. Why? Because we live in an age of intensifying individualism and isolation. Therefore, community needs not to be assumed, but built. In the US, the National Library of Medicine has determined that about a third of the US population, start again, this is for the whole world. A third of the population in industrialized countries is affected by perceived social isolation. Wired magazine, which has driven the digital revolution, had this report where they reflected on how this has contributed to isolation. They said this: recent research by Gallup showed that 80% of young people under the age of 18 report feeling lonely. 80%. With 22%, almost a quarter, and these numbers keep going up, saying they have no real friends at all. 0. 12% of adults admitted to having no close friends in 2021, compared to just 3% 30 years earlier. That's an escalating number. In these stats is a collective cry of loneliness. People don't just want followers anymore, they want real friendships. This is Wired magazine, like Silicon Valley's magazine. In Australia, The Guardian reports that loneliness is becoming one of Australia's most pressing public health concerns, which costs us as a nation, we're one of the few countries who's costed this, costs us as a nation $2.7 billion a year. That's $165 per Australian. Sorry, $1,565 per Australian who experiences persistent loneliness is what it costs the Australian government in knock-on health costs. The United Kingdom and Japan have both recently appointed ministers for loneliness. Derek Thompson, who is a writer for a journalist for The Atlantic, has labelled in a recent article our age the antisocial age. And he has this killer line in this, which is like this is basically he's labelled this. This is a long quote. This is my caveat. This is a long quote, but really worth reading. In 2020, the philosopher and writer Andrew Taggart observed in an essay published in the religious journal First Things that a new flavour of masculinity seems to be emerging: strong, obsessed with personal optimization, and proudly alone. Men and women alike have been delaying family formation. The median age for first marriage for men recently surpassed 30 for the first time in history. Taggart wrote that the men he knew seemed to be foregoing marriage and fatherhood with gusto, instead focusing their 30s and 40s on wedding bands and diapers. They were committed to working on their body, their bank accounts, their meditation-sharpened minds. Taggart called these men secular monks for their combination of old-fashioned austerity and modern solipsism, sleepwalking. Practitioners submit themselves to ever more rigorous monitored forms of ascetic self-control, he wrote, among them cold showers, intermittent fasting, data-driven health optimization, and meditation boot camps. I need someone up here on the thing, doing that sort of like Southern American, on the thing here. This is like preaching from Derek Thompson into our moment. When I read Taggart's essay last year, I felt the shock of recognition. In the previous month, I'd been captivated by a particular genre of social media, the viral morning routine video. If the protagonist is a man, he's typically handsome and rich. We see him wake up, we see him meditate, we see him write in his journal, we see him exercise, take supplements, take a cold plunge. What is most striking about these videos, however, is the element they lack: other people. In these little movies of a life, see, that's why I need the thing. Woo, yeah, come on. We see no friends, no spouse, no children. These videos are advertisements for a luxurious form of modern monasticism that treats the presence of other people at best as an unwelcome distraction, at worst, an unhealthy indulgence that's ideally avoided. I thought of this video that I saw of the influencer Andrew Tate, and he put it up, and it was like Merry Christmas, and he's in his compound in Romania, and he's got his shirt off, and it's all decked out around in Christmas stuff. And he's just working out, and he's this is meant to be a flex. And it's just interesting, someone just wrote down the bottom, like in reply, just said, there's absolutely no humans in this video apart from you. And this weird thing when you see these sort of influencers who move from objectifying women, and then weirdly there's this strange, almost like Shakespearean ending where it's like they just become these objects themselves, objectifying themselves utterly alone in a compound, just focused on the secularity of the body. All right, I'm stopping now. We're going to continue. Thompson notes that numerous psychologists are noting that there's a misreading of introversion in our culture. Susan Cain wrote a book on introverts, which was a massive bestseller. And so much of our economy is now being built for introverts. And introversion is a thing. I'm introverted. But we do not understand what psychologists are telling us. Understands us about energy. They did this thing where they said to introverts, if you're on a train and someone spoke to you, a stranger, how would you feel? Would you feel energized or de-energized, stimulated or unstimulated, connected or like I just don't want anyone to talk to me on the train, is what they all said. But then they actually got someone to go on the train with them and engage them in a really interesting conversation about stuff that they were interested in. And they interviewed them afterwards. And the introverts actually said, I feel energized. That was great. So what the psychologists are saying, that often what these labels do is they give us a label when we don't actually understand what we want. Wired, who I quoted from before, a champion of tech, has come up with an answer. Non-tech must be the answer. In Amsterdam, non-tech small groups are now emerging. They're spreading across Europe. What are they? 10 to 12 people get together, maybe at a cafe, maybe at a home. They put out tea, they have some cake, and then they talk about deep stuff. And then this is where it gets radical. I mean, this is wild. Hold on to your seats. They do this every week, like on a Thursday. And these small groups are seen as an answer, and this is radically new. Time magazine recently employed, again, readers too, and again, this is shocking. This is a quote, look to lead, to create third lives. Whether it's through a noble commitment to volunteering, talking to new people, or the steady building of regular social outings, creating a framework that is safe from the reach of the temptation of performative busyness is a higher calling for this lonely moment. It's not really third lives. It's just what people have done in like every culture in all of history. None of these solutions are new to the church throughout its history. What is new is that the church effectiveness is also under pressure through the decline of community. The great American sociologist Robert Putnam noted in his classic work, Bowling Alone, that the church's decline was less about belief as it is about a dynamic that began to happen to the whole of the culture where communal organizations from trade unions, migrant organizations, social clubs, lodges, all began to decline at the same time. Therefore, for the church to fulfill her exciting and vital mission in the world, we must work together to rebuild community. And this is a key moment. COVID sped this up. The internet is pouring fuel on it. But what you're seeing across the culture is this coming to realization of two things. That there is an absence of connection and community across the whole spectrum. This is now blinking code red across, you read, governments across the world. We're also seeing this massive return of people all of a sudden interested in faith. That's happening across the world. We're seeing more people turning up now, like in the last 2 years, exploring faith, coming back to faith, the most unlikely people. Why is this happening? Because there is a lack of meaning and purpose in people's lives. But also there's a sense there must be a bigger story. The church is built for a moment like this. So third point, how do we build spaces of belonging? If you live in the modern world today, you've probably picked up patterns that will work against this. I think we can all put our hands up and say that. So to be part of this vision, it will require some counter-cultural postures, and particularly if you're young. I don't say that to have a slam on the young. It's just that these trends have exacerbated as we go down. But let me just read again Hebrews into this context. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. All right, so what I want to do to just land is, if you write notes, get them out. I just want to just drop a bunch of important thoughts on how we can do this. The first one is to place God at the center. C.S. Lewis wrote this incredible short essay. It's called The Inner Ring. And in it, he captured this dynamic that's so key a part of human community and how we seek community, that it tends to be present everywhere. It is almost the drive, and anytime you talk about community, you have to put this up there. And what he said is that people throughout history, everyone does this, is that when you think about community, you will think of a community, and he called it the ring. And what's operating is that there's a ring out there. You'll see some people who are friends who you know, and they talk to each other, there's a ring. You'll see an organization, and people seem to connect, there's a ring. Even at your workplace, it might be the management or whatever, there's a ring. And the key thing is, you're not in it. And so you have this drive. This gets into us in primary school, high school, university, maybe even earlier, playgroup, where you see the group of people, and there's them, and you're outside the ring. That's you. And so there's this drive, and it can drive us and even shape our personalities to be the kind of person who then can get inside the ring. But what's interesting is, often then you get inside the ring, and as soon as you get inside the ring, there's another ring. So you finally meet that friends, and there's that 10 people, and they're really cool and groovy, and I want to hang out with them. But then you go to start going to their parties, and they're like, oh, it's really the 3. They're the really, if I only could get in there. Or you go to work and, I want to work at that place, and you get into the workplace, and then it's the people who've worked there longer are those people. This happens at church. One thing I found so fascinating in just being around church, and particularly talking to leaders, is often you talk to people, and people on the fringe of the church will feel like, I'm not in. The number one thing, like you sit with, and they perceive who's in, the number one thing when I sit with pastors and you talk to them is you ask how they feel, and you say, how do you feel? Do you feel isolated? And just, yes, so often comes up because weirdly, there's this thing where what Lewis's point is, there's no inner ring. That as soon as you get in it, that you realize that this thing doesn't exist. And we have all these exclusive clubs, and they have, like, American Express would make this special card that they only give to some Hollywood celebrities. And we have all of these things that seemingly reinforce these inner rings and exclusivity little traits. You and I are not going to the Academy Awards. But what Lewis is saying is that all of this is a human drive to belong that can only be found in God. As Augustine, who I quoted earlier, said, we're never home until we're home in God. So we have to realize that all human community, in some sense, will fall short of what it is to be at home in God. And that this life will actually be working towards building in a kingdom which is here, but not here fully, now and not yet, where all human community will fall short in a way, but we're actually building towards something. That's why I call it the ascending triangle is important. If you've ever done maybe some relationship counseling, I think we've got an illustration, there's a triangle up there. What you'll see is this. And normally it's done when it's you and you're getting married to someone. This is a classic of pre-marriage counseling, if you've ever done it. And basically this idea is real simple. When you just look to the other person for everything, they will fall short because they're a finite human being. But when you decide together to move towards God, pursuing God, and you do that together, in the Latin, communitas, community moving with a purpose towards God, this is the essence of really what is different about Christ-centered community. Churches will let you down. I'm finite, team's finite, you're finite, we're all finite. We all make mistakes. We're all in process of learning. Relationships have been under tremendous pressure. COVID really did weaken the connective tissue of our society, the dynamic of our society, from how the workplace looks like now to the internet is working against this. But, might just go back to that. Sorry, thank you. But when you begin to move towards God and pursue God, all of a sudden what starts happening is the person next to you in that prayer meeting who's contending for God, who normally you would not hang out with, maybe they're different to you, maybe they're older, into different things than you, not normally someone you hang out. All of a sudden you start to find a purpose in God that actually builds fellowship and this very different sense of community. Next thing. Building social capital. Community grows through small, faithful deposits of connection. We so built to think that the way to get things is to get experiences. The ultimate, what must be the most accelerant, like a steroid you can just hit in the arm that's going to build up community in a second, is experience. If I can just have incredible experiences that are like this mountaintop moment, some, amazing adventure in the jungle somewhere of Thailand with a bunch of people who have the same interests of me, community is going to happen. But actually, really how community is built, and this is why the writer of Hebrews says, do not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, with love and good deeds, is that in many ways, like social capital is something you've got to build, to belong, to maintain community. It can almost be like auto deposits, like that you're putting in the bank, that when you turn up to something and you keep doing that, and you do it over time, actually community starts to be built. Again, Derek Thompson getting lots of quotes in this sermon. He says this: there is such a word for such deeply etched communal habits, rituals. And one reason perhaps the decline of socializing has synchronized with the decline of religion is that nothing has proved as adept at inscribing rituals into our calendars as faith. There is something in the church life of meeting together in worship, having a huddle, going to that play group that we spoke about. These little decisions, like putting these 5-cent pieces into a piggy bank, bumping into people. Community is not something that happens in this hyper moment of experience. It's actually something that's built over time. It's like an investment. And so when you get into the habit of meeting together, as the writer of Hebrews encouraged us to do, you're putting that on auto repeat. And you start to bump into people, again, just as like the prayer meeting, people you would not normally hang out with, but actually you've got this purpose together and community is built, particularly when people decide to do that together. It also means that relationships require a cost. That actually to say yes to relationships and building community might mean saying no to something else. But this is a cost, it's an investment with a return. Third one, relationships inevitably are linked to risk. We live in a culture, there's a great book by the American data scientist called Nate Silver, and he says the world has gone into two sort of like cities that are competing for our attention. The city of safety, the village of safety, or the village of risk. Different cultures live closer to one than the other throughout history, and everything's become so safe now, and there's an element that's good. It's good to live in a safe place. There's positives to that, but the danger is it's really hard to build and create new things when you're just exclusively committed to building something that's safe. So to be in relationships, risk. People can let you down. You can let people down. We're imperfect human beings. We mess up, we stuff up all the time. There's an element where there's rejection is real. Some of you, that's very painful and present in your mind. Again, this is the kingdom now and not yet. But there's still, with risk, there often comes a return. No risk, no relationship, no reward. So to have the reward of relationships, we have to step into risk. In particular, I just want to say that for younger people, there is this sense that awkwardness is a really difficult thing to pay a price, and that sometimes relationships are held back because there's a sense of it's going to be awkward. But awkwardness is the building blocks of what can later be intimacy and connection. Fourth, character through relationships. The struggles of relationships are the forge of Christ-like character. Yes, we're human. Yes, relationships has risk. But when it does go bad, when others have let you down or you've let others down, or often it's a combination of both, there is this reality that when you give that to Jesus, he grows something in you. There is this discipline where bringing our pain and bringing these things, and even things that are very present and not solved at this point in time, that when we bring that before Christ, there's this element that we meet him, Jesus, the suffering Lord, and that becomes this forge of Christian character. We could not risk it all and not leave the house. But by doing that, we don't then embrace the risk, which sometimes hurts. But actually, we don't then get to go on the adventure with Christ the Lord, who says, follow me, take up your cross to become more like him. Last one. There are different scales of community and there are different seasons of community. Real quick, lots of books I've talked about today, but there's a book by Joseph Myers about belonging, and I'm just going to boil it down to this. He says that there's different kinds, size groups that we need to belong. There's often community, when we talk about it, we mess it up because we think it's just the intimate thing. We want community. So I'm going to come to community. I'm going to walk into this morning and I want that intimate thing that is absent in my life. And then we're not going to get it with how many hundred other people in a room because this is not the space that's necessarily built for that. What Maya says is that humans tend to have little groupings of intimacy. That's normally with 2 or 3 people that you often go really deep. Some it might be 1, others it might be 4. But these are the people who you share the deepest things of your life with. Others are more personal. You're not going to go the deepest, but they know how you're going. They'll pray for you. They'll support you. There might be 10 or 12. Notice Jesus had these. There's the 3 really in the discipleship community. There's the 12. And then there's the social. That's the 100, 200. And then there's the public sense. This is, I don't know, you go watch, your favorite sports team, play a game, or this sense of the scale of a country that is your country that you support. Humans need different scales. Just to do one and not do all of them, Myers would argue that sense that you still are lacking in community. And there's just the other bit I put there, which is not up there. There's seasons. Really interesting. I saw this thing. It's sort of a little bit depressing, I thought at first, and I thought, and it's realistic. The highest amount of friends you will have is between 18 and 24. And it goes like this. You go up, you have teenagers, you get this really good group of friends around 18 to 24, and then it just begins to decline, and then it keeps declining, and it just goes down. And part of this is just this dynamic that when you're 18 to 24, you're at uni or you're with young adults, and I meet so many people who are trying to go back to that, but what changes is responsibility. I think about when I was 18, the stuff I was doing, I was like volunteering in all this church stuff, I was playing soccer with mates, I had all these different connections and people and so on, because I just had so much time. I didn't realize how much time I had. I slept until 11 a.m. every weekend. Now, what was I doing? But then I think about the other time that I have when Trudy had given birth to the twins, had Grace as a toddler, and I had no time. I didn't sleep until 11 a.m. I was up most of the night often with twins screaming. We had one twin that was a night guy and one twin that was a day guy. Why couldn't they sync up? Trudy laughs. It's good. She's healing. Yeah, that's what God's done. I remember during that time, literally, we just made this decision. Like, if we could just get to church, we would get 5 minutes late, leave 5 minutes early sometimes. It was just like such a massive effort. Literally during that time, I remember there was this guy who I'd known from years earlier and hadn't seen him for a while. I used to go to church with him. And weirdly, our sort of kid time synced up. So we would first time we bumped into each other, it was like 11 o'clock at like Woolworths PM. And how you going, mate? And then we just I think we just sort of kept bumping into each other on purpose because we were like hanging out. So we're in, the nappies aisle and how you going? Having a good chat for 20 minutes. That was my social life. That was his social life for that period. Okay, so there's different scales of time. Empty nesters, different scale. Kids are different scales. If you're single, that's a different seasonal scale. There's different seasons and scales that people have. So community, what people have in their think of that piggy bank to put money into stuff of like community, you can have different amounts each, different times in your bank account. But think of that story that Jesus told of the lady who didn't have much, but what she gave to the Lord was worth so much more in the kingdom perspective. So you maybe just smashed at the moment. Maybe work is just so hard, or maybe you're running after kids, or maybe you're dealing with some issues, some health issues, whatever it may be. I'm not saying here now, you've got to do like the village chief. What I am saying is the Lord is asking you to be giving with him, sacrifice, but sacrifice knowing that there's different things in that piggy bank. So, the question I would like to leave with you is how can I build community and relationships this year at Red? I wish there was a button I could press and this stuff would happen. We've been on a journey of learning over the years. Had to rebuild after COVID. It was just like seeing it torn apart and you came back. It was so tough, took so long. And, but I just have this sense that this is only going to increase in society. And I just have this sense that Leslie Newbigin said that one of the greatest witnesses of the gospel is the congregation, the people of God. And what if just these little deposits of what you do, just chatting to someone, turning to your neighbor, these little things actually began to build the people of God, and people are so hungry and disconnected. I think sometimes we can even take that for granted being in the church, of how disconnected. I was talking to someone recently, some stat, like I think guys now in sort of middle age, like something like 1 in 3 Australian guys have no friends at all. So God's put us here. God's created us as a family. And it's not a closed family. It's a family that Christ is at the center. The Holy Spirit is between us. God the Father is part of this beautiful divine communion. And that his love flows through us and flows to others.